second session of the day, which is Terrorism and the Changing World Order, State, Quasi-state and Non-state Actors. To moderate this session, I would like to invite the session chair, Dr. Rohan Gunaratna. So just to give you a brief introduction for Dr. Rohan Gunaratna, he is a professor of security studies at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Nanyang Technology University, and the founder of the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research in Singapore. A former senior fellow at the Combating Terrorism Center at United States Military Academy at West Point and the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Gunaratna was invited to testify on the structure of Al-Qaeda before 9/11 Commission. He is the architect of ASEAN RIs, the Regional Counter-Terrorism Network, the author of 20 books, including Inside Al-Qaeda Global Network of Terror. Thank you so much, Dr. Rohan Gunaratna. Thank you for joining us. We are honored to have you along with our distinguished panelists. It's all over to you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, this session is Terrorism and the Changing World Order, State, Quasi-state and Non-state Actors. And to start this session, I would like to invite Dr. Michael Rubin, who is a senior fellow, American Enterprise Institute. It's a very distinguished career in the Department of Defense. He will bring insights into how the threat landscape has changed and how it will continue to evolve, and what can be done to mitigate these threats. Let me invite Dr. Rubin to take the stand.
Thank you very much. Since we're running late, I'm going to try to be very brief. I'm going to continue with my discussion with regard to the importance of ideology and how the West remains blind to it. In 1946, the Intelligence Department of the Department of War of the United States, the predecessor to the Defense Intelligence Agency, was charged with determining what the greatest over-the-horizon threats to American national security would be now that Nazism, fascism, and the Japanese army had been defeated. And they came up with two. One was communism, which was an obvious case given what was going on in Azerbaijan at the time. And the second one was Islamism. Now remember, this is 1946, a year before the partition of Palestine, or the vote on the partition of Palestine, 2 years before the creation of the State of Israel. And so when we look at this notion that terrorism is motivated by grievance, that if only there's Israeli-Palestinian peace, terrorism would go away, it belies the fact that the ideology was seen as a threat even before Israel came into existence. And the question was, what was the evidence for that the intelligence community at the time was looking at? And it went back to the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood and basically this notion to excise this, this pollution of the West from Islamic societies. It's been very difficult in the Islamic world to explain why it is, if they are the seal of the prophets, Muhammad was the seal of the prophets, they succeeded the other monotheistic religions and so forth, why this power differential has existed that became glaring after Napoleon's invasion of Egypt in 1798. Some people said if you can't beat them, join them, and there was that sort of reform movement. Other reform movements basically said, and this culminated in the Muslim Brotherhood and what we see in Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State today, that you basically got to purge all Western influence violently if need be. Now, I'm very, very cynical in the West about this notion of countering violent extremism. And the reason I am is I see a lot of these programs as just snake oil. One of the problems we have in the United States is because we have a separation of church and state, of mosque and state, it basically means that religion is seen as a third rail, and we transpose our own blind spot into our policy on the rest of the globe, that we can't talk about policy. We had Secretary of State John Kerry say that the Islamic State was neither Islamic nor a state. And yet Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the caliph of the Islamic State, had a PhD in Islamic theology. John Kerry, I still don't know what his credential was on this issue. The point is, we can be politically correct, but that doesn't help. And in my time living in Iran, all my time in Iraq, in Somalia, in Syria, in Yemen, and so forth, what I often find ironic is while the Americans will look at criticism of certain aspects of Islamism, as somehow Islamophobic or try to stigmatize for political correctness these debates. Within the regions themselves, there is no stigma. They talk about the open religious debates. When we talk about green on blue violence in Afghanistan, for example, where Afghans who we were training would turn their guns on NATO forces, we forget that green on green violence was 3 times as high. We can never forget that the people who do the most dying in the fight against radical Islamism are Muslims themselves. And so when we ignore the fact that there's an active debate going on in these societies, we actually do a policy solution harm. Now, as many of you know, I spent some time with the Taliban pre-9/11, when I went into Kandahar and Kabul back in March of 2000 and so forth. And one of the things I've seen from Somalia to Syria to Turkey to Iran to Iraq is this notion of what causes the extremism, and it boils down to something called abrogation, which, as you all know, the Quran isn't organized in chronological order. It's organized by size of chapters. And there's a method of interpretation which basically argues that we will understand where all the revelations were in chronological order in order to understand and to shed some light on the interpretations of the Quran. And that those revelations which were revealed last to the Prophet Muhammad have greater weight religiously than those that came before. So it is possible to say the Quran is a book of peace, because there's more than 200 verses that talk about jihad as nonviolence, that talk about tolerance, that talk about the religion of peace. But chapter 9, verse 5 says that when the sacred months have passed, then slay the idolaters wherever you find them. It doesn't start with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, because it has nothing to do with mercy. It's the only chapter that doesn't, and scholars believe it was revealed last, or second to last, to the Prophet Muhammad. It doesn't make the notion of violent jihad to be optional. It makes it mandatory. So when it comes to abrogation, if this is what is motivating or convincing some people that extremism is the way, then how in the theological debate in exegesis do we actually counter that notion? There's a couple ways we can do this. First of all, back in the 1980s under the Nimeri regime in Sudan, there was this notion of reverse abrogation, where a scholar basically had said, we've got this wrong. Instead of the political verses in the second half of Muhammad's life, canceling out the spiritual verses in the first part of Muhammad's life, that it should be the opposite. The Meccan verses, the spiritual verses, should cancel out the rest. And for his statements, he was actually executed. So one policy prescription is, how can we delegitimize or counter this notion that any heterodox view will result in someone's death? When I worked in the Bush administration, Saadettin Ibrahim was arrested by the Egyptian authorities for saying that there was no difference between the autocrats and the theocrats. The autocrats used the mechanisms of state, the theocrats used the mechanisms of the mosque. The only thing they agreed on was to try to snuff out liberalism in between. And for that, he was arrested. The Bush administration held up $120 million in aid. Then you have the case of what happened in the Quran. The Quran is eternal. It was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad starting in the year 610. But Muslims believe that, or scholars believe that, it existed 1,000,000 years in the past and 1,000,000 years in the future, but God knew that in the 7th century AD was when he was going to reveal it to the Prophet Muhammad, which means the Quran is written in the language of God. Now, here's the issue. If the receivers of the Quran back in 7th century Arabia, if God knew that they were going to be the ones to receive it, what in the Quran is designed to be understood by 7th century Arabs, and how do you convert this to other sorts of other Muslim peoples? And we've had this situation in Iran, we've had this situation in India and elsewhere, in Egypt, which wasn't considered an Arab country until the 1930s, in which this notion that why should we interpret the Quran as a 7th century Arab? Why can't we interpret the Quran as an Iranian, as a Persian? We all know that Iranians look down upon the Arabs. The point is that when that sort of issue happens, we've had people stigmatized, declared to be kafirs, to be heathens. The whole problem we have of blasphemy laws. So what are we doing to punish that? In the United States, one of the things we could do, why is it, for example, when we want to engage with the Muslim world, the State Department makes glossy pamphlets that show all these veiled women? Well, a lot of Muslim women coming to the United States come to the United States so they don't have to dress like a 7th century Arab. And so by trying to be more Orientalist than the Orientalists, we actually do ourselves some harm. Why is it that when we have interfaith dialogue, the State Department will send American Muslims, imams, to engage? Why don't we send the businesswoman or the US military naval surgeon who are Muslims to represent the Muslim community more than someone who might be subsidized by the state of Qatar or by Turkey, where according to Turkey's own statistics, the murder rate of women under Recep Tayyip Erdogan has increased 1,400% since he came to power. That's a statistic from Turkey's own interior ministry. The point of this is, if we are constrained by our own political correctness, if we're afraid of engaging in religious debates, the Americans and the Europeans have no ability to do this directly, but if we can provide a platform to basically counter the blasphemy laws in Pakistan, to give voice to the Ahmadis, to give voice to Shia who might be more prone to Sistani's viewpoint than to Ayatollah Khamenei's. That will do much more than giving contractors these money for countering violent extremism and all these issues that address around the problem rather than tackle the problem head on. And with that, I turn this back over to you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Rubin presented a very insightful presentation on the ideological dimensions. So now I turn to Colonel Mary, who is from Israel. She's a very good specialist. She served with the Israeli intelligence community and also served as advisor to the Prime Minister of Israel during the Second Lebanon War. And today she works at the Reichman University. The Reichman University has a specialist counterterrorism research and training center called the ICT, the main counterterrorism academic research center, I would say even in the Middle East. So we are very honored to have you. Welcome you to South Asia, and we would now invite you to present. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and first and foremost, really, thank you for inviting me. This is not a given, so my accent is very American. I'm going to talk slowly and clearly. I'm a practitioner, you're a historian, and I say there's a vast difference between the way we approach issues. I'm going to be very practical. Israel from October 7th is fighting in a 7-front, multi-front war. We keep saying Hamas. Israel has been fighting against Hezbollah, that's Lebanon, and I'll add in against Hamas in the West Bank and in other places. The Houthis in Yemen started to fire at Israel from the end of October 2023 and have been doing so until January 19th, 2025. The Shiites inside Iraq, let alone the two very direct military engagements of the Islamic regime of Iran against Israel in April of 2024 and October of 2024. The Israeli response, have I given you enough fronts? But what I want to talk about is the conceptualizing of the Hamas attack as a concept, because I'm sitting here, you said Southwest Asia, and I want to give you a concept as an idea, food for thought for you. And I'm presenting it through what I understood not at, sadly, 6:25 a.m. on October 7th, but I understood it, sadly, at 6:35 a.m. on October 7th. It started at 6:30. So that my conceptualizing was too late. I did not understand this before. If possible, is it possible to bring up the slide I asked to bring, just to put it there for people to look at if possible? If not, then no. Hamas prepared this attack years in advance, even decades in advance. Take notice. They did not start this attack because of what was happening in Israel in 2023. They did not start this because of our frequent changes in government. They prepared 5 different tiers of defense, and I pose the concept as 5 levels, tiers. They're not one on top of each other, it's an idea, but I offer this as an idea to look at other places, because Hamas is a hybrid terror organization. It both participates in the politics of the Palestinian arena, as does Hezbollah. It is also a terror army, not a terror organization. Afterwards, again, to expand on what's the difference between a terror organization and a terror army. Not that one, but okay. That's a lovely one, but not connected. So 5 tiers or levels of decades of preparation. The attack on October 7th, every element is a known terror tactic. But the combination of these 5 different tiers is brand new. In military terms, it's a new modus operandi of a terror army. And you have potential terror armies in Southwest Asia. This isn't something unique to us, it's something to look at. The 5 levels are the preparation decades in advance of the subterranean underground arena. For my military contemporaries here, the underground subterranean arena is the one that every military dreads. You know that already from the 1960s, and we already mentioned, again, Vietnam or Viet Cong. This isn't something new. Nobody wants to fight underground. The underground subterranean arena, the Hamas were preparing for literally 20 years. When we were there, after we left, they built hundreds of kilometers. They built that, and here it has to do with the terror army, into the urban area of the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip is a small area, certainly compared both to India, even to Israel, and that urban area for a terror army is the deployment area. I'm a military. All the different places, I also, as the terror army, as the plan, they took dead bodies. This has to do with understanding the Israeli side of the impact of both live and dead. They took not only, for the first literally month in Israel, every day we would change the amount of hostages. They burnt bodies along the way. They took bodies and dropped them. It took us a very long time, including until now, to define who's alive, who's dead, because they never told us, because they're a terror organization. This issue of the hostage taking is both about what it does in psychological warfare, but especially as a strategic asset. I never thought I would be talking about a 9-month baby who's over 2 now, who I don't think is alive, okay, personally, because there's still a woman with her 2 babies who we haven't heard of, and the fact that we haven't, to me, means they're dead. But that's a strategic asset when it comes to Israel. The hostages, take note. Don't say, Palestinians, Hamas. Take note, this is their most successful endeavor. 2 additional levels that go into that. One has already been mentioned here in a very different way, international organizations. For Hamas, and I say for Hezbollah, because everything I'm saying, the subterranean, the urban arena, the hostage taking as a plan, and remember we're 16 months into it, and as we speak is the exchange of 3 more Israelis that's supposed to be happening right now. The international organizations, and it was mentioned here, they're there, and they have turned into the representative of the victim. I'm not attacking any victim. I don't want to attack a victim. The way a terror organization in that sense builds itself within the civilian population, and the bigger problem It's part of the civilian population. It's very difficult to distinguish. But the international organization legitimizes both the victimhood and the victimizer, meaning the terror organization. I don't think that the United Nations Relief and Welfare Organization for the Palestinian refugees, all of us know it as the acronym UNRWA, I really don't think that it is a terror organization. But when you come to work for UNRWA, what we don't realize, and this is true of most international organizations, is that 99.9% of their employees are the locals. And if they don't have on the list of questions, hi, are you a member of a terror organization? You can't work for me. UNRWA was the second largest employer in the Gaza Strip. That means inadvertently, okay, so for those who want after, you can. The subterranean and urban I spoke of, the hostages and their captivity, and now I'm just saying about the international organizations, and again, this is as a concept, not as a blueprint, but this idea of the impact of international organizations. Last night in Beirut, Hezbollah supporters attacked UNIFIL fighters. The United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon has Indian troops, if you don't know, okay? They're deployed in one of the regiments that are there. I'm just saying, so there's an Indian aspect. The ones that were attacked inside Beirut were Italian and French in Beirut. An international organization like UNIFIL in Lebanon or UNRWA in the Gaza Strip and throughout the Palestinian territories, they immediately do what I heard, I think Dr. Rubin say, they legitimize the terror organization because they work with them. And I pose this as a huge problem. I don't want to victimize the victim. I want to help them. But take note of that slippery slope of the international organizations, let alone what's been happening in the ICC and the ICJ or in the UN, etc. I'm the one who's always worried about places where there's just a numeral advantage. 193 members of the United Nations, any vote is going to be against Israel on the numerals. But I put that there. And the last one is the one I want to happily expand with everybody. We live in a world where every single one of us, even here on the stage, as I said before, give me your phone for a moment, okay? I didn't bring mine up here. You all realize that we all have weapons? You all realize that each and every one of us hold this? I want to describe for you to understand the depth of the information warfare, one single aspect of October 7th. On October 7th, Hamas in live streamed the attack. They live streamed it in two different ways. This was planned. This was not something that was done without thinking. They took, I apologize, I don't know names, but the lovely Armenian, right? You're from Dr., I'm going to remember in a moment, but I'm bad at names, okay? I just took his phone. As the Hamas fighter, I walked into your terrorist. I walked into your house. I took your phone. I made you open up your social media, like Facebook or whatever, but on yours, the one where it's your friends, not the public one. And I live streamed your death on your Facebook platform. A grandmother's murder was live streamed to her family. The psychological impact means that in Israel, not only were 1,200 people murdered, 25,000 people saw murder live stream of somebody they knew. You understand what that is? That's a different type of war. And then I stepped in as the Hamas terrorist Nukhba fighter. I've been raised in that extremism. I have completely been risen in the place where it's beyond delegitimizing. It is dehumanizing. You're not human beings. And I bring in my phone and I go, Mom, look at what I'm doing. Ummah, okay, they were live streaming on their own. Mom, I'm killing the Yahudim, the Jews, not the Israelis. Look at what I'm doing. And thank you, and I apologize. The live stream was hand in hand with a very planned and successful information warfare platform that has probably been Hamas's biggest success, but from October 7th, that was heavily, heavily amplified by Iran, that has a very strong capability to amplify voices. I give this again, all right, that's already gone, but I give you that idea of 5 different aspects, because in the last 16 months, Israel as a country has been exceedingly effective and even successful against Hezbollah. Okay? That understanding of those 5 tiers makes a difference in the way you address it. But the reason we were mainly successful against Hezbollah is because we understood the threat before. So that the last point I'm going to say here in this idea of the non-state actors and their implications, because Hamas is a non-state actor, because Palestine is not a state. By the way, I'm in India. You recognize Palestine as a state. You have a Palestinian ambassador here. So I give you part of the challenges that we all have with, okay? But Hezbollah is in a nation-state Lebanon. It is a different type of actor. Take that idea to different places. And I offer in that sense just the challenge that we have, that we were not looking at Hamas the right way. The scenarios we built were so different from what happened because of the element that I call the unthinkable. Wonderful people here, start thinking the unthinkable, because part, not all, part of our colossal failure of October 7th was because we couldn't think the unthinkable. And when you think the unthinkable, you're slightly better prepared. And I hope that by offering the idea, the conceptual idea of how a terror organization that became a terror army, that is a political and social power, okay? All of the above and everything I said of Hamas is true of Hezbollah and of other challenges within the Middle East, but also in Southwest Asia, South Asia, West Asia, Southeast Asia. I could go to a lot of places with this. And to take note of these ideas, and I offer them, as I said, for your understanding and hopefully to prevent for you the horrific, horrific implications, because today I'm still waiting to see which 3 out of the remaining 73 hostages may be let out today. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. Colonel Mary, I want to say that of the 3 main terrorist attacks the world has witnessed, the most significant attack was 9/11 attack. The second worst terrorist attack was the attack that Hamas staged on October 7, 2023. So we are very grateful that you presented the insider's perspective into the Hamas attack. I think it has changed, the Israeli response has changed the Middle East very significantly. We hope that it will continue to change the Middle East and eventually build stability and security in that region, because the Middle East is the heartland of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, let me turn to our next speaker, who is going to present to you on a very important topic. He is Dr. Benjamin Pogosyan. He's a senior fellow of the Applied Policy Research Institute in Armenia.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for the invitation to Usanas Foundation and personally to Dr. Pandya. It's really a pleasure to be in Jaipur. Previously, I have been in India only in Delhi 2 times, and it also gave me opportunity to expand my understanding of vast Indian culture, that India definitely is not only Delhi. The 2 esteemed speakers discussed about the use of terrorism by non-state actors, Hezbollah, Hamas, and etc. I would like to focus my attention on the case which Armenia faced in 2020, the use of mercenaries and terrorists by the state actor. And first of all, Armenia successfully before 2020 was not faced by any terrorist actors. So if you are sitting in Armenia like an average citizen or even expert, for us like terrorism, it was only something like on screen. It happens some in remote places, that is a terrible But most probably it had nothing to do with you, because we are not in the Middle East, we are not in Africa, we are not in even South Asia. So it always seemed in Armenia that terrorism is a very bad thing, but it has nothing to do with Armenia and it will never come to Armenia. But in 2020, I don't want to go deep into the history, but probably just very briefly, there was a war in 2020 by Azerbaijan against a self-proclaimed Nagorno-Karabakh Republic. And here, we see how the states can use the mercenaries and terrorists to push forward their state interests and geopolitical plans. Before that, starting from 2011, when the conflict and then civil war started in Syria, Turkey deployed mercenaries in Syria from different parts of the world. And then, when Azerbaijan was planning its attack against Nagorno-Karabakh, and Turkey is a strategic ally of Azerbaijan, there was a pattern of bringing these mercenaries and territories from Syrian front to Azerbaijan to be used against Nagorno-Karabakh Republic. So early information will emerge in summer 2020, even it was in media, but frankly speaking, even I, and I'm covering the South Caucasus geopolitics for approximately 16 or 17 years, even for me it was not like Turkey is bringing terrorists, and they are bringing it from Syria, then via Turkey, and then via flights to Azerbaijan, and then these terrorists will be used against attacking Nagorno-Karabakh. For many Armenians, it seems like almost a science fiction. No, it's not going to happen. Of course, Turkey will support Azerbaijan. There will be Turkish generals deployed in Azerbaijan, Turkish instructors, or even drone operators. But to bring terrorists, and then they will start fighting against Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, no, it's too much. It's never going to happen. But then, starting from September 27, 2020, when Azerbaijan launched its attack, almost the same day we started to receive information. We, I mean people in Armenia and the respective organization, we started to receive information that it not only the other soldiers, sometimes led by Turkish generals who are involved in active military, but it also the people with different ethnicity brought by Turkey, mostly from Syria. Also there were some rumors about people bringing also from Libya, because at that time Turkey also was very active in Libya, who were fighting. Then there was several international confirmation about this. France intelligence services, up to President Macron made a statement, and then two of these jihadists were captive, and they gave a lot of explanation how they were brought there. And interestingly, even here, the Turkey cheated them, because they were promised like thousands of dollars per month salaries. Go to Nagorno-Karabakh, kill Armenians, and you will receive your money for few $1,000s per month. But effectively, they were given nothing. And then the war ended, 44-day war on November 10, 2020. But according to our knowledge, part of these mercenaries and part of these territories are still in Azerbaijan, in the territories which Azerbaijan took during the war. And as Armenia-Azerbaijan peace negotiations are in impasse now, 5 years passed since the 2020 war, there were a lot of hopes that Armenia and Azerbaijan will be able to sign a peace. I don't want to jump into this conflict narrative and conflict history, but as there is no peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and still as the mercenaries and terrorists are still deployed in Azerbaijan, at least according to the intelligence knowledge here in Armenia, we believe that if there will be another attack by Azerbaijan, and this time not against self-proclaimed Nagorno-Karabakh Republic, but Armenia proper itself, that most probably Azerbaijan may use these people, and Turkey also can contribute to this. So this is a viewpoint from Armenia, how even the country which seems that has nothing to do with terrorism, was never faced with terrorism, it was in the more or less secure from terrorist activities part of the world, because in South Caucasus you can go into the media now 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, South Caucasus was never perceived as a place when terrorism was active. Of course in North Caucasus it's a different history. There was a Chechen war in 1990s and a lot of the discussions. But the point which I want to make is that even the country which seems that has nothing to do with terrorism, nothing to do with Islamic radicalism, and can more or less feel secure from terrorist threat, but even this type of countries cannot be secured, because unfortunately terrorism is being used, and is being used not only by non-state actors, and there was a lot of talk by my esteemed colleagues about ideology and about the technology, how the terrorism are evolving their technologies, but also the terrorists and terrorism can be used by states to push forward their geopolitical interests. And my understanding is that here India knows it very well, given the long history of terrorism being used by Pakistan against India. So this is another interesting aspect, I guess, regarding the evolving threat of global terrorism. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. I'm going to focus on 3 points. One is, how has the threat of terrorism changed globally? First is that we are seeing the state actors are playing a very significant role in supporting terrorist movements. So if you look at the case of Israel that was presented, we have seen with regard to Al-Qaeda, the most significant terrorist group of the past. The leader was Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was in Afghanistan. He was killed in Kabul. So although Taliban promised that it will not permit any terrorist group, Al-Qaeda leadership was located there. But after Ayman al-Zawahiri was eliminated, his successor is Colonel Saif al-Adel, a former Egyptian Special Forces colonel. He moved to Iran. So in Iran, he was hosted by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. So Saif al-Adel also did something very significant. That is, he wrote a series of articles calling for attacks against not only Israel, but the United States and their Western allies. So you can see that how Al-Qaeda was operating out of Iran. Saif al-Adel also sent his son to Yemen to build a relationship between Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and the Houthi movement, the group called Ansarullah. So today we are seeing that Al-Qaeda no longer is fighting the Shia groups. The Shia groups are no longer fighting Al-Qaeda in Yemen. This network out of Yemen has now spread to the Horn of Africa, where we are seeing that Al-Shabaab is also working very closely with the Houthi movement and with Iran. So you can see how the threat has migrated from Iran towards its partners and proxies. Let us look at another partner, that is the Lebanese Hezbollah. After October 7th attack, one day after, the Lebanese Hezbollah started to fire rockets. So what we have seen is that the Lebanese Hezbollah has suffered very significantly because the Iranians were ready, the Israelis were ready for it. In fact, the Israelis anticipated the type of attack that Hamas staged. It would come from the Lebanese Hezbollah. That is why, because preparation is key, that is why they were able to dismantle the Hezbollah senior leadership and also decimate the organization to a very large extent. But what we are seeing is that the threat, the Iranian axis, is now moving eastwards. It's coming to you. So I'll give you 2 examples. One is that the Hamas representative in Iran, last week he traveled to Pakistan and he visited Azad Kashmir. He met with Maulana Masood Asar's brother and they had an event in support of the Hamas activity. Hamas leaders constantly visited the Taliban, the Afghan Taliban. Constantly the Afghan delegations visited Hamas leaders in Turkey and in Iran. So what we are seeing is the axis that existed with the groups in Iraq, the groups in Yemen, the groups in Lebanon, and the groups, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas in West Bank and also in Gaza. Similarly, Iran is building a similar network towards Afghanistan, Pakistan, and in this region. Turkey itself is playing a very important role. We saw day before yesterday the Turkish leader visited Pakistan. He's shortly visiting Malaysia and Indonesia. So is Turkey the new Iran? Because Iran itself, many of their capabilities will be degraded in the coming months and coming years. President Trump will not tolerate Iran building its nuclear capabilities, developing a functional nuclear weapon. Israel itself is ready to strike Iran. So a very significant development on the part of, in the Middle East, of course, the emergence of Turkey, which is very sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood and also very sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood's Palestinian partner, which is Hamas. So this is one of the most significant developments in the global threat. The second most significant development is the Islamic State or the ISIS. This group has suffered very significantly in Syria and in Iraq. But the group is reviving, and it is reviving largely in the FPAC region. So the Islamic State Khorasan province by Sanaullah Ghaffari, known as Muhajir, he has today moved from Afghanistan, from Nangarhar and Kunar regions to Balochistan, where he has set up his infrastructure. He has built a very significant capability to conduct long-range deep penetration attacks. And one of the best examples was the attack that he staged in Turkey, but the attack that you know of is the attack he staged in Moscow, where they attacked a very significant target. Unfortunately, the Russians said that this attack is by the West. It is politics. But I want to share with you that this attack is by ISKP, the Islamic State Khorasan province, which is in many ways the de facto external operations wing of ISIS or the Islamic State. So we are seeing that some elements of the threat is shifting eastwards. The third most significant development that I want to share with you is that the terrorist networks, the terrorist entities can be divided into groups, into networks, into modules, and into cells and the individual. But if we look at these networks, it is largely coming from the ideology. The ideology has to be fought. It's a very difficult challenge for every country, including for India. Why do I say the ideology has to be fought? Because it is largely embedded in the clerics. So the religious clerics that preach violence, that preach exclusivism, has to be taken to task. When I visited the Saudi National Security Prison, of the 6,000 prisoners, 4,000 were clerics. So MBS is targeting the heart of the infrastructure, which is the religious clerics. So I believe that there must be a concerted effort, not only to catch, kill, or disrupt operational terrorists, but the ideologues and the preachers behind it. This is one. Second is governments should start effective programs for prevention. Prevention means community engagement to build resilience against extremism. Governments also should rehabilitate these terrorists. Unfortunately, in India, there is no national rehabilitation program. So I hope that one of the prongs that you all should campaign is to build a national program. Some of the individual states have created their own rehab programs, but it is imperative to rehabilitate terrorists. If you don't rehabilitate them, three things will happen. They will infect others with their ideology. Second is they themselves will do attacks. And third is they will become a part of the iconography, meaning they will become heroes of the terrorists. So how do we rehabilitate these terrorists? One is religious rehabilitation using clerics. Second is educational rehabilitation using teachers. Third is social and family rehabilitation using social workers. Fourth is vocational rehabilitation using vocational instructors. Next, you have to have creative arts in rehab. Song, dance, music, puppetry, to broaden their thinking. And finally, psychological rehabilitation. So I believe that in the fight against terrorism, the game changer is terrorist rehabilitation. So we need the kinetic and the lethal response. But in parallel, we also need preventive programs and rehabilitation programs. Once again, let me thank my colleagues for their presentations, and let me ask if any of you have questions, this is the best time to raise. So we will do it like this. We will ask 3 questions at a time, then the panel will respond. Please proceed. The gentleman right at the back. Yes, you.
Thank you, Chair. Very kind of you to have given me a chance, and at the outset, let me compliment. Firstly, I am Major General Sudhakarji from Indian Army, retired, settled in Jaipur. At the very outset, I wish to compliment a soldier lady, Colonel Miriam, the way you have made a profound presentation. But I have 2 questions for you. With due respect to Israel, it's a formidable force. List out, can you rattle out 5 things that Israel should do to prevent a recurrence of 7th October? One question. Second question I have for you is that if technology could be applied effectively to neutralize top leadership of a formidable non-state actor like Hezbollah, was technology adequately and optimally used by Israel armed forces to prevent an event like 7th October? Why couldn't you do it? These are 2 questions for the lady. And one question I have for Dr. Rubin is, it is carrying forward from the previous discussion. Fixing the geopolitical problem in a multi-alignment or multilateralism is by fixing the balance of power. To fix the balance of power, a very respectable former Lieutenant Governor of Delhi made a point: dialogue without a stick will have no meaning, but I personally feel dialogue has to have the military might. US has got military might. US has got everything going as a superpower, but I think US needs to rebuild its internal strength and stability to be effective as a superpower. Rather than having multilateralism, it will go on, nothing can stop. The transatlantic relationship based on which the security architecture of the global order today is based is definitely going to be a declining phase, because it is the Asia century, we cannot debate. But there is a new normal which is actually coming up in 21st century. It is a new threat. Terrorism today is not manifesting the way the chair has explained. Terrorism today has taken a new phase. In 2016, in Germany, it is not a lone wolf attack. One single driver carrying steel beams, ramming into one of the marketplaces where the celebrations were going on, killing 86 people, injuring 286. Almost in the same month, another attack took place in France. A guy carrying a cargo in a vehicle goes into Paris, kills some people. In recent past, in Magdasaro, I'm forgetting the name, where a Saudi Arabia origin doctor also rammed into a Christmas celebrations, killed many people. January, USA has witnessed similar kind of attacks taking place, whether it is Las Vegas or in New Orleans or New York. This is a new normal which is emerging. Is USA as a superpower today alive to the new reality? If yes, what steps are being taken by US or likely to be taken? Thank you.
Yes. Please ask your question now.
My question is to Dr. Rubin and to the Israeli colleague. See, I'm from Bangladesh, okay? And the only country we don't have diplomatic relation is with Israel. Even if I want to go to Israel, it will be blasphemy. I cannot come back to my country. So it is not the war of the religion, you know, with the Judaism, Islam, whichever it was done. But the Arab countries, they are enjoying the relation, whichever way, they are enjoying relation with Israel. But we as a Bangladesh, you know, country, we cannot have any relation. This number one, my question. And to Dr. Rubin, my question is regarding the deep state. As you know, the recent development in Bangladesh, which had 6 months back, the regime change, which was done by the previous government, Biden government, with the help of Donald Lu, who is the key figure of this regime change. I don't know what it brings, but as a Bangladeshi, I can tell you, we have now the Hamas is there, ISI is there, very actively they are engaged in Bangladesh, ISI. And there are Hezbollah also. The same actors who are in Middle East doing this thing, they are meddling in Bangladesh as well. And why I'm telling this, the role of India in the backyard of this neighborhood, India will have more problem than Bangladesh, much more problem. I remember distinctly when I was ambassador in Moscow, I told one of my colleague from India, ex-ambassador, it was 6 years back, that if Bangladesh became anti-India, it will be worse than Pakistan. Today we are going to see this thing. So I would like to know from Dr. Rubin his comments regarding how we can, eliminate these elements to have a peace and stability in this region. Thank you.
The last question. Yes.
Yeah, so quick two questions. One is to the colonel from Israel, Dr. Aisin, and the other one is to the chair, Dr. Rohan. To the Israeli colleague, you see, after what has happened in the Gaza war and the regime change in Syria, you also have a group of Islamist fundamentalists taking over a state, which is a threat to Israel. So do you think there needs to be a second regime change in Syria? That's number one. And to Dr. Rohan, you talked about ideology as a tool to counter Islamism. I just want to take it to the next level. When you talk of a counter ideology, what should it be drawn out of? Should it be drawn out within Islam? Are there derivatives which can be used? Do we have to go to traditional ideologies, of the region, which includes traditional ideologies drawn from Buddhist tradition, from the Hindu tradition, as part of a counter ideology package? It's one thing to fight physically, but or to fight even ideologies, but to give a counter ideology perhaps and go on the offensive is equally important. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Please ask your question. Yes. Yes.
Well, I came prepared actually for the subject as listed, terrorism and the changing world order. So, and similarly in the last session, somewhere one expected the issue of the transitioning world order to be addressed. Instead, we got perspectives of the problems of the past. Something similar, that same vein continued here in some parts. But I think, as the Armenian representative highlighted, that is the nature of the change in the state of the world begetting terrorism. And I would like to draw on something that Michael said in the previous session, where you mentioned that the transition from British imperialism to American capitalism was the only transition without violence. I think the entire case of terrorism in the last century was that America externalized that violence, which is inherent in a global or in the change of a global order, And partially it was fought by the emergence of Israel, middle of a change, because the old system has not succeeded. It has collapsed, or it is failing. So there will be many more dimensions of terror, especially state-sponsored terror. And perhaps one issue which nobody has addressed, that the changing world order today is not just the world order of the pecking order of nation states. It is the new world order which exists in the realm of ether, the internet. And how will that, the dichotomies between that and the profligacies and the arrogance of the nation states and the violence that begets, these are issues which, if somebody were to address.
Thank you very much. We'll take the last question. That is by you. Yes.
Thank you. My first question is, and there are two small observations. Do we know any personality from the Islamic world, leader, intellectual, artist, anybody, who has made a significant dent in the spread of radical ideology? Do we have any name? And has made a significant difference to his country or the society he belongs to? This is my question. Now I have two observations based in this city, Jaipur, where this wonderful session is being held. In last 50 years, I have seen at least 40 demonstrations organized by communists and pseudo-Islamists, which is support of Hamas, which supports Palestinian struggle, and which spreads so many kind of myth. It has happened in this city. Number two, second observation, which you are so well versed of these things, I have heard at least 35 years back in Germany from a Pakistani friend. He said that you Kafirs don't know what our pashas have been planning and how they will take over the world. You have not even a faintest idea. He was a Pakistani doctor in Frankfurt. Manka, come on, Doctor Saab, come on, tell me what it is. That they are planning on a horizon of 100, 200, 500 years. And one most important one, his observation, which I somehow agree, that even if 1 million people die in tribal warfare in the Middle East, and 100,000 get into Europe and America, it's a profitable deal for our leaders. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to respond to your questions. This will be the final round of responses. There will be no more questions. Let's start with Colonel Mary.
Talk about questions. I'm going to try to address them specifically, but it may be a bit more general. If I knew before October 7th what I understood on October 7th at 6:30 a.m., I would have screamed it from the rooftops. I'm saying this as a warning to all of you. I am sick of all of the Israelis over the last 16 months who said they knew before that this was going to happen. If they knew before, they should have prevented it. And I say that, sir, because the 5 points I'll say now, I didn't understand before October 7th about Hamas. I think that we all need to take note of ideology, as Dr. Rubin said, but the ideology is not the only thing. What we can do right now is destroy capabilities. I don't know how to destroy the ideology. Au contraire, in my non-French, by the actions I'm taking against the capabilities because of the Hamas defense system. And that means the underground, in the urban arena, and the hostages, in the international community, in the information warfare. All of those 5, I am vilified in Jaipur. I am vilified. I do a lot of media. I know what it's like to be on Indian media. I know what it's like to be on Chinese media. I, Israel right now, am the bad guy, despite October 7th, because of the Hamas preparations. Take note. What can I do differently? A, it's to be aware and to prepare myself. I think that the biggest section that we failed at is, from my point of view, is in the international information media war. In the sense that, and here it's also in that sense to terrorism and what it is and isn't. Sir, terrorism has been with us way in the past, in the present, and in the future. And I think that the biggest misconception is about social media. Social media is the main recruiter for extremism. Yes, it can counter it. Who is recruited? For all of you here, those who are disenfranchised, not with Israel and Palestine, that they're disenfranchised with the place they live in. If they are unhappy, if they feel that they're not part of. Excuse me, I'm sitting here in Jaipur and I'm listening, fascinated by an Indian narrative. How can I say this without sounding I'll be Israeli. We diss Muslims. There are 2 billion Muslims in the world. They don't all want to be terrorists. If I do a generalization, but when I look at a younger generation, both where I live, in my arena, 65% of the Gaza Strip was under the age of 25 when this war was started by Hamas. That means that the next generation there, not only did they hate me, because look at what they did October 7th, but boy, they hate me. Could they hate me more? So when you look into that future of how you de-radicalize, remember that it is both the platform that says, do you feel that your government doesn't represent you? Do you feel that the leaders in your country sideline you? Do you feel that you don't have a future where you are right now? Do you want to belong to something that's bigger than you, that's stronger than you, that will give you meaning, that will give you an idea, that's going to make you stand up and feel proud? Because ladies and gentlemen, I just recruited you to the Islamic State. They don't say, hi, do you want to kill people, cut off their heads, and be a sadist? That's not what they're doing. They're recruiting people, mainly young, who feel disenfranchised. And I say that because that's part of the mistakes that Israel makes. The lack of a vision for the Palestinians doesn't make it any easier for them. But to be clear, terrorism became more extreme at the height of dialogue. Because when dialogue kicks in, the ideology kicks in. The ideology that sees that I shouldn't exist. So the last comments that I'm going to say is I'd love to have diplomatic ties with Bangladesh, by the way, also with Indonesia or with Malaysia, other very large, well, Malaysia is small, but Indonesia is big, Muslim countries that we don't have diplomatic ties with. But I want you to take note that the name that was given to October 7th in Arabic was Tufan al-Aqsa. You say al-Aqsa, you've just talked to the world. That the name that the Islamic Jihad, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, call their own troops, what they're going to show the Israelis that they're going to put in disgusting uniforms today, because they've already done that, is the Al-Quds platoons. Al-Quds, Jerusalem. I've just talked in Arabic, not to Arabs, to 2 billion Muslims. And last but not least, about Syria and So I've been following, I'll call him Muhammad al-Julani, I'll call him in his name. He calls himself Ahmed al-Shara, and I say, so do I call him Ahmed al-Shara, or do I call him, which is his name? Because for those who have not followed the transition in Syria, Syria for 54 years was under Miri, who was the head of the Syria department in the Israeli intelligence. It was the worst dictatorship. There are worse. It was a horrible dictatorship. For the Syrian people, they're in a new horizon after 54 years of the Assad family that protected very specific minorities within their country. But then I look at it as an Israeli. I share an 89-kilometer border with Syria. It's a boundary, it's not a border. And on the other side of my border is somebody that I have followed for the last 12 years. I admit, I only started following him in 2012, that's even more, that's 13 years, when he came to Syria to establish Jabhat al-Nusra, that was the Al-Qaeda affiliation inside Syria. And then he changed, okay? He went from Jabhat al-Nusra, there was Fatah al-Sham, and then he went to what we call now HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And I note the word Esham, because you mentioned Khorasan and the problem of the I wrote it down because I didn't know that term, what did you call it? The AFPAC? The AFPAC arena, I like that term, good for me to learn. But I say that because what is on the other side of my border? Is it a Taliban type organization? I do want to say, okay, his transition, because it's his personal transition, physical, okay? The way he's dressed, his head covering, his beard, he has transitioned. He showed his wife is not in a burqa when they went to Turkey. He's sitting with women, okay? It's not the same as the Taliban, at least at this stage, and I don't know where it will go. For the Syrians, I hope they have a better future. For me, Israel, after October 7th, I am going to be very suspicious, but I want to remind you what that does. If I'm suspicious, I'm also not open to the idea that maybe they did change. I just want you to take note, because every action has a counteraction. And if I don't embrace it, the whole world is saying hello. But the whole world is not me. I'm me, Israel after October 7th. And I give all of those because, yes, it's multinational, multilateral, all these different changes. But I, Israel, changed after October 7th. And the last point I'll make is I had an epiphany as an Israeli when I was in the States a few months ago, an epiphany. 9/11 changed the world. October 7th changed Israel. And I need you to understand that difference, because in our action, we changed the Middle East. That will change the world. But I, Israel, changed after October 7th. I say it as a scholar, as a professional, as a practitioner. We address terrorism in a different way. State actors, non-state actors. By the way the world looks and doesn't look at this, because Hamas presented to us something. You said Hamas and Palestine in one word. And I absolutely understand that. That's part of my challenge. Hamas is a terror organization. I can support Palestinian self-recognition, a Palestine state, but I'm not willing to establish next to me a state that is ruled by Hamas, let alone any of the others. So why should I be quiet when HTS, in a conglomerate, took over Syria,
Thank you very much. Dr. Rubin.
I'll be very brief. First of all, multipolarity is something that seems very trendy, seems very positive. I would argue that multipolarity is about preserving conflict. We can talk about changing the system and who's on top, but when we talk about multipolarity, we're talking basically about constant tension, constant war, and so forth. Americans navel gaze quite a bit. We exaggerate our fissures. It's a mistake internationally, however, to assume that just because we air our dirty laundry means that others who like to hide their dirty laundry don't have those same fissures, perhaps even worse. One problem we haven't talked about is that undoing incitement is a multi-generational project. This is one of the biggest mistakes I see with regard to the United Nations, whether it's UNRWA and the various schools that they've established to perpetuate hatred, even though in January 1951, UNRWA recommended its own dissolution so that we wouldn't have this situation. But I spent much of last August with M23 insurgents in eastern Congo. And when we look at what MONUSCO does in North Kivu in eastern Congo, the same guys who perpetrated the anti-Tutsi genocide in Rwanda have been operating the schools in North Kivu, and so is it any surprise that we have the same conflicts erupting in eastern Congo, a country, Congo itself, the DRC, has $24 trillion worth of resources, geologists estimate. It's a major problem, and the UN has some serious introspection, which it should do. When it comes to all this discussion of the deep state, I'm sorry, it sounds very conspiratorial to me. What I would simply argue is Bengalis have agency. Even though I think that Bangladesh is on its way to becoming a failed state and a terrorist safe haven because of what happened, it's a little bit too easy to try to blame the outside world. Trust me, most Americans don't know where Bangladesh is. The fact of the matter is, when we talk about deep state, when we punt the issue, ultimately what we're doing is taking an easy way out to avoid our own local responsibility for local decision making. And that goes more broadly to conspiracy theories. How do you discredit ideology? I'd say the best person who's discredited Iran's ideology is Ayatollah Khamenei. And when we look at the generational change there, you know, Iranians tell a joke about an Iranian woman who's getting married. On her wedding night, she tells her husband, I probably should have told you this before, but this is my second marriage. And the husband goes, what? She said, no, don't worry, I'm still a virgin. Well, how can that be? Well, my first husband was like Hassan Rouhani. He kept promising to do it, promising to do it, promising to do it. But after 8 years, he didn't touch a thing. I mean, the fact of the matter is, the reality of life under the Velayat al-Faqih has really been the best antidote to Islamist extremism. And then the question becomes, how do you fracture the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps? But also, what did the Muslim Brotherhood do when they took over Egypt? They embraced satire. They tried to, I'm sorry, not the Muslim Brotherhood didn't do this. The Muslim Brotherhood reacted. They tried to arrest Adil Imam, one of the famous Egyptian satirists who had made fun of the Muslim Brotherhood. Likewise, if you try to tell a joke in Turkey, you're going to wind up in prison. You know, I mean, a prisoner goes in after a bad joke, gets sentenced to 20 years in prison in Istanbul, goes into a library in the prison. He has 20 years to do nothing but read. He hands a list of books to the prison librarian and says, do you have these books? The prison librarian says, no. I'm sorry, we don't have any of these books. We only have the authors. The point of this is that joke is what got me banned in Turkey. And the fact of the matter is, Islamists aren't very good at dealing with being made fun of. When it comes to the US and the United Kingdom, look, we can debate why. But the fact of the matter is, when it comes to dominant unilateral powers, that handover was peaceful. I actually don't accept your explanation that we just outsourced the violence. If anything, that could have been, the stakes were higher and it could have led to more violence. But the danger right now, as we navigate US and China, even though personally I think China is a declining power rather than a rising power, is how do we replicate the lessons of the 1920s to 1970s rather than create a situation of the Napoleonic Wars. And finally, I just want to say, it's not only Israel which has suffered a hostage crisis. There weren't questions directed to my Armenian colleague, but Armenia is currently also facing a hostage crisis. And one lesson I would actually take from both is when your mediators are more ideologically supportive of one side rather than the other, and they're not being supportive of democracy, they're being apologetic to the hostage takers. Ultimately, that is a problem. We need to be, this goes into the notion of dialogue. Dialogue for its own sake isn't always positive. We need to be much more strategic about who we have negotiating on our behalf when we have to enter into those negotiations. It shouldn't be UNRWA, it shouldn't be Qatar, it shouldn't be Turkey. But I'll leave it there.
Thank you. As I wrap up this session in 2 minutes, I invited Dr. Abhinav to join us. It is because of a reason. Because the Usanas Foundation can spearhead the terrorist rehabilitation programs in India. Usanas Foundation can also spearhead the prevention or the community engagement programs in India. The 63% of the world's Muslim population live in Asia. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia hosts the world's largest Muslim communities. It is not in the Middle East or in Africa. So I want to ask you, because he's a very dynamic leader, and this is something that you can do. Let me respond to your question about who is the Muslim leader who has openly spoken against extremism and made a profound impact. You will find many, but I will just mention one name. Who is the best-selling poet in America today? Can anyone tell me? It is Jalaluddin Rumi. So, something that we are doing is we are distributing Rumi's book in prisons around the world. where there are religious extremists in custody. His words are so sweet and so beautiful. So I want to share with you that we must not demonize the Muslim community. It is true that religious extremism is a major challenge, but throughout history, it has been a challenge, not only from Islam, but also from other faiths. So I ask all of you to give your support to Usanas Foundation so that they will be able to spearhead the two prongs in the fight against terrorism. These are magic weapons. One is rehabilitation, other is community engagement where you promote moderation, toleration and coexistence. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this engaging discussion. Someone made a reference to Azad Kashmir. Just to clarify, there's nothing called Azad Kashmir. It is Pakistan occupied Jammu Kashmir, as Pakistan has illegally occupied it. It belongs to India.